Hi, Nadia.
Thank you. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm Atiya. I am speaking on behalf of my brother's podcast called the Brothers Geek Out Podcast.
Amazing.
I've been telling them to change the name now that I'm involved. So it should be Brothers and Sisters Podcast, but they're just too lazy to do that.
Fair enough.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. I'm going to get straight into it because I know you've got a very busy schedule. So yeah, first of all, loved the movie. Really, really got me. I got really emotional as well, so I was quite surprised. I was ready to be scared more, but I really enjoyed it. So on adapting a novel, you've spoken about wanting to recreate the experience of reading Walter Mosley's novel rather than just putting it on screen. Can you walk us through how you approached that challenge? What stayed the same and what you felt needed to change?
Yeah, I think that I read the novel 20 years ago and it stayed with me. So in many ways, I was trying to recreate my own experience of reading the novel rather than like the story, if that makes sense. So I think that that helps you sort of like focus the story on the things that you're interested in. And I think it also helps you find a tone. And I feel like the images that had stayed with me as a reader were really not maybe scary, but kind of like horrifying. Do you know what I mean? Just like and so I sort of knew that those were kind of key images that I wanted to keep in the film.
Yeah,
And me and Walter, we didn't really work write together on any drafts. Like he wrote some drafts, and then I took over and wrote the later drafts because I think that I needed the film to be personal, and I think the only way you can do that is for it to like flow out your own pen.
yeah,
So I think probably the film is darker than the novel. I think it's more kind of baroque. And I think also, I was really interested in, I guess, locating the main character Charles's grief within it. I think that I was really drawn, since I'd read the book, to this idea of two men who had no families left. Do you know what I mean? Like what it is to be the last of your line. And that that Charles has really never got over the death of his parents. And although all of us, all our parents will die, I just was really interested in somebody who like that severing to his family or the notion of family and that loneliness was
cool.
just something he couldn't shift, which is quite a big departure from the novel. So yeah, I sort of refer to the film and the novel as, cousins, not twins.
Yeah, I like that. Nice. My second question was, what was it like collaborating with Walter Mosley himself on the screenplay? Did you ever have to convince him to take on a different approach, compared to the novel? And how did those conversations kind of go?
Yeah, like I said, we didn't really collaborate on the script. Like he just wrote earlier drafts and then I wrote later drafts. So it didn't
Yeah.
really, that's not, it's just not how it works. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like he wrote his versions and then I wrote my versions and obviously I wrote them with his versions in hand. So yeah.
Kind of kept it aligned in that sense.
No, it's not, I mean, Walter would say, if you want to read the book, it's on a shelf, you're making the movie. So I think it's like, actually, I was at liberty to be quite free and take what I wanted and leave what I wanted.
Oh, nice. I love that. Um, so on themes and storytelling, the film explores obviously power, morality, identity in a very like intimate way, but yet unsettling. What did you most kind of want the audiences to sit with after like the credits rolled?
Mm. I think I wanted the audience to reflect on like who gets to tell history, and sort of thinking of like, actually, is it easier to follow or to forge your own path? But also, I think to to have a mind, I guess, to what's going on behind everybody's front door. Do you know what I mean? Like what kind of, there's a really key scene in the film where Charles goes to see his neighbor and realizes that she's been taking care of a sick relative for decades. And that thing of just like having a mind, Harbor is a very inspiring place as a community of black people. And actually I just, but like community is like kind of an idea that's quite hard to grasp. But actually I just wanted to sort of show in that moment that actually caring for one another is deeply, deeply important work, and it's work that all of us can do.
Mm.
You know, and not to kind of spoil the film, but like Charles responds to that by making a kind of grand gesture to his community and giving back. And I sort of wanted people to think about, I guess, what they're doing in their own communities, and that community could be your own family, it could be the world. Like, what are you doing for people in Congo and Palestine and Ukraine? Do you know what I mean? Just thinking more to like, actually, what power do I have to affect the world around me?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So you've said the film is partly about facing what we are. Was there a moment in making the film where that theme became very personal for you?
Yeah, I think I was interested in, I'm always interested in like cruelty. And I'm very interested in like, I think that people find like individual suffering very easy to understand. And I think they find collective suffering, like the suffering of thousands or millions, impossible to understand. So I think the film really tries to focus on the difference between those two things. And I was sort of interested, you know, me and Corey would talk a lot about um, you know, it's very important not to kind of like morally judge your characters. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you're like, I've got to play them, I've got to find love for them. But I think, yeah, we would sort of be a lot like, you know, what is the edge of where
Mm.
Charles can't come back from? You know, he's always pushing his friends away, and he's always, you know, kind of, he's kind of well, he's an asshole.
Yeah,
And so, and we'd be like, yeah, but you know, how much further can we sort of push that. And I sort of feel like there's a scene in the film where he accidentally kills an animal
yeah,
and he's totally heartbroken by it, you know, because he's like that, you know, it's an accident and like accidental murder
yeah,
basically. And you see him sort of break down about that because that is the edge of him, like accidental cruelty or accidental violence is not in his nature. So yeah, I think that thing is sort of weirdly that's the moment where it sort of reveals who he really is. Like he's not somebody who is fundamentally like cruel or sadistic.
mm.
So I really enjoyed that scene. I mean, it was a nightmare to shoot, but I really enjoyed it.
That scene actually had me crying because I saw the pain in him driving, his eyes are closed, and it was like more he was trying to disappear, but instead he didn't go and it wasn't his time. And hitting the deer, it was kind of like a reality check for him. Like, not only did I hurt myself, I've just hurt this poor animal. So yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
kind
And
of
also I think it's like, you know, that thing of I always think about that scene in the car is about him wanting to see what fate has in store for him.
yeah.
Like, but just, you know, what happens if I just literally let you know, let Jesus take the wheel? Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, oh, you know, my kind of like obsession with myself has led to the death of somebody else. But obviously, you know, there are kind of bigger thematic resonations in his own kind of past with that. But yeah, I really enjoyed that film. That was actually one of the first scenes I think I wrote from scratch. I mean, like I was like, I think he should kill an animal because that's a really interesting like test of who he is as a guy. Like, what does he, you know, does he drive on or does he go and try and find it and check if it's okay?
Yeah, interesting. So the story is set in 1994,
Mhm.
but its themes feel incredibly current. How do you see Charles' journey speaking to our basically our present moment?
Yeah, I feel like Charles is like a deeply lonely person. Like he's a deeply, by choice, people want to be with him and want to help him, but he wants to be alone. And I feel like we are in a moment where we are being encouraged to see ourselves as individuals and we are encouraged to cut ourselves off from other people or being in collective strength. So I was sort of really interested in writing a character about, you know, we always referred to him. I think it's a phrase from the filmmaker Paul Schrader, you know, he's God's loneliest man. You know, like it was always isolated. But by the end of the film, you know, does that change?
Mm.
And that felt like, you know, a lot of the film is incredibly dark. So I was like, it felt like a sort of me waving at the audience, saying like it is possible to be part of something outside of yourself, and actually you just have to be willing. Like you just have to open yourself up to it. I also think, you know, there's a very obvious kind of resonance at the moment with people ignoring conflicts happening on televisions. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just like, oh, it's too much, it's too depressing. Let me turn it off. Let me, put something lighter on. And, I think a lot of the story is about looking into those things, and facing up to them and facing up to the horror of them. The film is a thriller, and I guess more of the kind of horror inflections in it were not about kind of me wanting to make a horror film. It was more just like when you look into the face of like human cruelty, it becomes a horror. Like the things that humanity does to itself are like beyond our worst nightmares. Do you know what I mean? Like really, and we did a lot of reading about like the Belgians in the Congo and King Leopold and like the things that they would do for fun are just the stuff of nightmare. So it
Yeah.
kind of naturally just went that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It must have been intense. We're gonna back up onto them. Um, so yeah, on the characters and casting, see Charles Blakey is written as a deeply flawed, vulnerable character. What kind of conversations did you have with Corey Hawkins to help, craft this version of Charles for the screen?
Yeah, I think we did a lot of work about backstory, and we did a lot of work about like really building out all of Charles's life because it just felt like his own history was so important. But also, we did a few days where he worked with all of the other characters that make up his community, so like his neighbor, his friends. Do you know what I mean? To kind of create their collective shared history because it was all sorts of things like oh yeah, we met when we were 6 and we met you when we were 8 and this funny thing happened when we were 14. Like all of that work is really important even though it's kind of invisible work.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like you're never going to see it on screen, but we all need to know this collective shared history that we have, which was kind of fun. I rehearsed Willem and Corey separately because Willem doesn't need to know any of that. Do you know what I mean? He's like, and that's always a really satisfying way to tell stories. Like two strangers meet each other and they get to be whoever they want to be. But Corey had to kind of do two different modes because on the other side, when he's not with Willem, he's with these characters who know him incredibly, incredibly well. And so you sort of see him flip between being two people,
yeah,
sometimes slightly unwillingly, like he's like, oh, I sort of don't want to be this version of myself. But so yeah, we did a lot of work remotely about just like all sorts of things about like when did he first lose a tooth and how much did his parents give him from the tooth fairy and
yeah,
did his parents ever try and have another child and what would his mum make him as a snack when he came home from school, like that's the level of sort of depth we went into.
yeah, nice. Obviously Williams Defoe's Aniston is such a enigmatic character. How did you guide him to balance the kind of menacing vulnerability and kind of moral complexity character that he portrayed?
Yeah, I think again you just have to focus on like the facts and it's just like a different moral universe to an ordinary person. He doesn't think he's a bad guy, he thinks he's a good guy, like he and most bad guys, I mean obviously there are like bad guys in cinema who are like love being bad guys. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like think about like Wesley Snipes in Demolition Man, he's having a lovely time being a bad guy, he knows he's a bad guy, but actually I feel like William's character doesn't think that he's a bad person, he thinks that he's the employee of some really bad people, but he thinks he's just a tool. Like he's like, I just do what people tell me. I think there's a whole argument in the film which is like, it's about intention. Like I didn't intend to, I didn't particularly want to do that thing, but I was told to do it, so I did it. So I think that's why we focused a lot on, I guess, kind of like what you saw, like the middlemen of
Mm,
history, like not the kind of bad leaders, but like what was it like to be the guy who worked for those guys? Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
we were very influenced watching Raoul Peck's documentary Exterminate All the Brutes. It's a documentary series.
Mm,
And a lot of that is about the kind of mechanics of genocide. And, I remember in the final episode of that, they ask a question about like, think about the people who like designed the gas chambers. Not the people who are like putting people in them, but the people who had to come up with like the nuts and bolts that
yeah.
were gonna, what I mean? Like it's that thing of like, oh, I'm just an engineer doing a job, but this job is going to lead to the like one of the greatest evils in history. And that was fascinating to me. Like these guys who are just like, I'm just out here doing work, like it's my employ and like at what point do we go, oh, that person is evil?
Yeah, because I was really torn because I was like, I want to hate him, but then I felt bad for him because he was just doing what he was told, but he still did it. So
Then I sort of think history is made up of people doing what they were told, and you
yeah,
know, any soldier is probably doing what he's told, but war that murders civilians is just murder.
exactly, yeah. Then, um, you said you were interested in portraying black male vulnerability in a way rarely seen on screen. How did you navigate that portrayal without kind of falling into the kind of stereotypes?
Yeah, I think it is a challenge because I feel like there is an expectation of a certain strength in a black male body. And so we always were trying to show Corey in ways that felt surprising and kind of, even how we would like physically position him in a scene. Do you know what I mean? Like, or like sometimes, we made his bed slightly too big, so he appeared slightly smaller in it, and things like that. There were lots of like really small things that we did. And often it was just about shooting him alone in a space. I think we tried as much as possible to focus visually on his loneliness and as being a kind of figure apart from other people. But there's a sequence later on in the film where he believes that he's being stalked in his own home, and that's really difficult. Typically we would see maybe like a white woman in that
Mm,
position of like, oh no, I'm in the house and there's somebody scary in here with me. So, but actually we just kind of use the same cinema language of just like, how he moves through the house, checking the corner. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and it was kind of thrilling because, he thinks he's being chased by somebody who he could probably, take a swing at if he
yeah,
wanted to. So he had to totally believe that he was under threat. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's like in this situation, but also, a black man is afraid of a white man in a certain way. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a great line that Willem has about, with a single word, I could end your life. And I'm like, that is a real threat. And I think it's also a threat that white women have over black people. You know what I mean? Like, I think that whole sense of like, there's still a power, a dangerous power there.
And even though he was in the cage and he said that, it was still terrifying.
Mm.
Like you're
Because
trapped.
it's true.
Yeah,
You're trapped, whether you like it or not.
yeah,
I really like that. I really I like, obviously Silence of the Lambs is a great example of this,
mm,
but it's like you can still be the most terrifying guy in the room, even if you're behind a kind of plate glass, door. It's like he's still Anthony Hopkins is still the most terrifying person in the world,
yeah,
even though he doesn't actually present a physical threat.
yeah. It was William Dafoe's character, just the way he stood, the way he was writing, and it was just like Hannibal Lecter, his stance.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about like just like having authority. Like
Mm,
I've just got authority because, being a white man is in many ways being an apex predator. Do you know what I mean? Like the shark doesn't have to want to eat you for it to be like the most terrifying thing in the world
mm,
because you just go like whatever it wants is gonna happen. Like I am completely at the shark's demand. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
like if it wants to eat me, it's gonna eat me. If it wants to leave me alone, I'm gonna be okay.
yeah.
But that could change on a dime, and that's really scary. I was quite interested in. I weirdly watched quite a lot of videos of like snakes in captivity being fed mice, because I was like, it's like you're supposed to feed a snake a live mouse, right? So they drop a live mouse in, and sometimes the mouse will be living there with that snake for weeks because the
Oh,
snake's not hungry, and so they're kind of just like cohabiting in this
yeah,
tank. And then one day the snake eats the mouse, like just out of nowhere, because he's like, well, I'm hungry now, so I'm going to eat you. And that to me was really interesting.
yeah. I don't have long with you, so I've just got one more question before we can wrap it up. But it's been really, really fun. So you've spoken about how personal this film is, especially particularly in the light of the Sudanese conflict. How did your own lived experience inform your approach to the story?
I think, my family had to flee the war in Sudan, I think just before we went into prep for this film. And it made me think a lot about, possessions and objects and how much those things do or don't have meaning when you have to leave them all behind. And we're very lucky. We were some of the privileged few who had somewhere else to go. But actually that whole sense of like your home being taken away from you. And in many ways, I think in the film, that's that's the financial threat that Charles is going through, that somebody's going to take his home from him. But there's also a sense of like the whole thing of no longer feeling safe in your home. And I think even at the film's end, you know, there's too many ghosts. He still doesn't feel like entirely secure necessarily. And that to me felt really personal. That whole thing of just like once somebody has threatened to take your home away, will you ever feel safe there again?
Yeah, we never have that security. I guess it's gone. Um, Let me try one more question. Obviously, now that you brought the story to screen, what do you hope it contributes to the conversations about history, race, and accountability?
Yeah, I just feel like I don't think that the film is like entirely like clear cut about, you know, we should all be trying to preserve our history in one way. I think it's also pragmatic. Like history doesn't put food on your table, and that's also okay for you to not care, for you to be like, I'm living in the present because however you need to thrive is okay. But I think my own feeling is that the preservation of history and the retelling of history, like who gets to tell history shifting, is the most important thing. So in a way, I think it's less about objects and more about people, like who gets to tell these stories. And you know, one of the last images of the film is very intentionally three black women, you know, talking, all coming together on that issue. And so I sort of, you know, maybe that's just like me waving down the camera, but I'm sort of going, it'll be okay as long as we continue to tell our stories.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Honestly,
so